My name is Evelyn, and I never thought that at 67, I'd find myself in a situation where everything I thought I knew about myself would unravel. Life had become a routine. My days were spent in a quiet house on the outskirts of a city, a place I had called home for nearly 30 years. My children were all grown, living their own lives with families of their own. My time was filled with tending to my garden, doing some knitting, and occasionally visiting old friends. I was content, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. For years, I hadn't really thought much about the past or the person I used to be. I had spent decades focused on my family, my responsibilities, always putting others first. I rarely considered what I wanted, what I needed, or what truly made me feel alive. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I received a message from Mark. Mark was my first love. We met in our early 20s and shared a whirlwind romance, full of passion, excitement, and youthful dreams. But life had other plans. We went our separate ways. I married, had children, and slowly let go of that carefree version of myself. Yet deep down, there was always a small part of me that quietly wondered, what if? I hadn't heard from Mark in years, aside from a few brief exchanges during the early days of social media. But then, out of nowhere, his name popped up in my inbox. His message read, Evelyn, I'll be in town for a few days. Can we meet for coffee? My heart skipped a beat as memories came rushing back. I hesitated for only a moment before replying, yes, let's meet. When I arrived at the cafe, my heart was pounding. Mark was sitting by the window, looking so much like the man I remembered, his hair a little grayer, but his smile just as warm and familiar. We greeted each other with a hug, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since we last met. The conversation flowed effortlessly, as if no time had passed. We talked about everything, our shared memories, how life had unfolded, the families we had built. But as we spoke, I felt something stirring inside me. A connection I hadn't realized I missed so much. Mark wasn't just the man I once loved. He was someone who made me feel seen, heard, and special. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. For years, my life had been wrapped in responsibilities, obligations, and routine. Sitting there with Mark, I was reminded of a time when life felt full of possibilities, excitement, and passion. As our coffee came to an end, Mark smiled and said, I have a little time this afternoon if you want to catch up more. There's a hotel down the street. I have a room there. We could just talk like old times. I hesitated. Should I? Was this something I should be doing at my age? But when I looked into Mark's eyes, the same kind eyes I had fallen in love with decades ago, I felt something awaken in me. I hadn't felt this alive in years. Why not, I thought? What's the harm? So I agreed. We walked to his hotel together, chatting and laughing along the way. Sitting in his room, we continued reminiscing about our past, our hopes, and the dreams we once shared. The conversation was easy, comfortable, until I noticed how close we were sitting. His hand brushed gently against mine. The chemistry was undeniable. I kept telling myself we were just catching up, just reliving old memories. But with every glance, every accidental touch, something shifted. The line between friendship and something more started to blur. Suddenly, I was no longer just the woman I had become over the years. I was that young, carefree woman again, full of excitement, full of possibility. The old sparks were reigniting, and deep down, I knew I was making a decision I might later regret. We didn't do anything inappropriate, but the emotions, the intimacy, were undeniable. I could feel the tension in the air. A part of me didn't want to leave. We talked late into the night, and when it was finally time to say goodbye, I felt that familiar ache of longing. It was as if I had momentarily stepped back into a life I had left behind long ago. The next morning, I woke up alone. Mark was already gone. I sat by the window, staring out, feeling an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The excitement of the previous night had faded, replaced by the weight of what had happened. Not physically, but emotionally. I'd opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. Mark never called again. I tried to reach out, but he became distant, almost as if that chapter had quietly closed for him. I realized then that I hadn't just lost a reconnection with an old friend. I had lost the chance to rediscover a part of myself. I mistook my loneliness for something else. I confused the longing for connection with the idea that someone else could fill that space inside me. It took me a few weeks to truly process everything. That's when it hit me. Life isn't about waiting for the right person or the perfect moment. It's about living for yourself, for the things that bring you joy, purpose, and passion. I decided then and there to stop waiting for life to come to me. I decided to start living again, no matter how old I was. Maybe I made a mistake that night with Mark, but in the end, it led me to one of the most important realizations of my life. I needed to be true to myself. I needed to stop living in the shadows of my past and start creating the future I wanted. So I moved on. I began traveling again, meeting new people, embracing new experiences, and reconnecting with the things I had once loved. And while Mark remained just a distant memory, I learned to fully embrace my own journey. A journey filled with joy, discovery, and more self-love than I ever thought possible.